Well, Nathaniel Ogunniyi, the political commentator with Young Voices, is here to go through the papers with me. Nathaniel, good morning.
Good morning, Rosie. How's it going?
I'm well, thank you. Is the Mail right by saying death of the work ethic?
Well, I'm not so sure it's the death of the work ethic, although there is clearly a generational divide. When you look at the numbers from the latest polling, looking at young people and their approach to work, it's definitely different to the generations that have gone beforehand. And I think you were talking about it a bit with Terry a few minutes ago, but you look at the number of people, particularly young people, who are signed off work with mental health conditions, and you can't simply run an economy like that. You look at what West Streeting calls the overdiagnosis of mental health conditions, and I think that is a real cause for concern. I think most people agree that if you can work, you should work, and our sort of social safety net can only bear so much weight, so to speak, right? I think the fundamental point here is that we need to support people who can work to do so.
This was the accounting firm PwC that conducted the research, and what they found, 1 in 4 young people are considering quitting the workforce entirely. Why do you think that might be?
So I think there are a number of reasons, and they are somewhat pandemic related. I think the pandemic means that a lot of young people didn't get the socialization that they otherwise would have. It means that some of them didn't go off to uni when they would have. It means that some of them simply spent more time at home away from other people. And so now that life has gotten somewhat back to normal and people are used to socially interacting again, I think people who missed out on that time have sort of somewhat fallen behind, or adjusted to a life that meant they spent a lot more time at home, when that's not really the way that society is now. So I think that's caused some difficulties. I think equally there's been a lot of communication online about the way that people can game the benefits system, or the way that people can claim benefits that they weren't necessarily intended for them originally. And so I think that has led to people sort of sitting back and going, okay, how much can I make if I sort of stay at home? Or how much can I get if I stay at home? How can I maximize my claims? And that's, of course, linked to some of the discussion that there's been recently about motability, and how, so many car purchases now are linked to what was previously quite a small scheme to assist the disabled.
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of comments about that car scheme. I don't think we've got time to get into it in detail. Let's look at the other stories on the front page of the Times. The number of failed asylum seekers waiting for an appeal against rejections has risen by nearly 500% in 2 years. What's going on here?
Yeah, so I suppose part of that is that the number of people trying to come to the UK is obviously very high. You see that not just because of wars elsewhere in the world, but you see the people, I think, see the relatively generous benefit system that we have here. People see the relatively stable incomes that workers have here, and so there's a massive pull factor to the UK, from other countries. Living here, we may not necessarily see that, but actually, there's a massive pull factor bringing people over to the UK. I think there was
part of this is that we're not able to deal with them when they're here. So right now there's just shy of 42,000 people waiting for a decision. That was the end of last year. And ministers are suggesting, look, we need a sort of 24-week legal deadline for all asylum appeals to be heard, because that process is just far too slow. That's causing a multitude of knock-on problems.
Well, I'm not sure new target to the solution. Over the last few days, we've heard a lot about NHS reform and how the government are scrapping NHS England and taking that into direct reform. I think the last government found that there were 73 targets in various areas in the NHS. But because you have a target, that doesn't necessarily mean you hit it, right? So I think it's a bit more difficult than just setting a goal. You actually have to do some work towards achieving it, right?
Yeah, but I guess what is that?
So I think similarly with planning, the way you need more planning officers, I think in this case, you do need a lot more staff working on both sorting the evidence out for these cases. Because, of course, if anything is missed, then that can lead to an appeal, and that appeal delays the system. But also, I think you need more staff in the judicial system who are able to hear these appeals. I think you also need to limit the number of reasons that an appeal can be filed. Again, there's a crossover with planning here, whereby if you limit the number of reasons that someone is allowed to appeal a decision, to sort of more technical things or clearly defined legal parameters, then I think you get a much smoother system overall that sort of delivers the cases of asylum for genuine seekers, but sort of weeds out the people that we know are trying to game the system.
That would be the hope. The other story on the front page of the Times is Keir Starmer, who said he's willing to station thousands of British soldiers in Ukraine for years in order to maintain a ceasefire and deter another invasion by Russia. Is that the right decision?
Yes, I think it is. And when it comes to defence and Ukraine, I think there's been a lot of cross-party support. You heard the Prime Minister just before he went off to the United States. He made a statement in the House of Commons saying that he'd be raising defence spending to 2.5% by 2027. And the ambition is that it'd be 3% of GDP by the next parliament. And there was cross-party support for that, right? There is cross-party support, I think, for raising defence spending, and equally, the Prime Minister has mentioned that there'll be a national security strategy by the time of the NATO conference in June, and I think that's much appreciated. Broadly speaking, both main parties, that is the Conservative and the Labour Party, have been behind Ukraine and strong in their support for Ukraine. I think obviously that position has come under some difficulty with the US and the US refusing to give security guarantees, but that just means that Europe needs to step up. And I'm actually quite proud that Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, has been leading the world efforts on this stage.
Yeah, well, that meeting of the coalition of the willing, as they've been described, are going to meet in London on Thursday to discuss in great specificity, they say, where the peacekeeping forces would be deployed. The challenge, the backdrop to all of this, Russia has repeatedly said they won't accept a peacekeeping force in Ukraine. Might things change between now and Thursday? Potentially. We know that President Trump has said just in the last couple of hours or so that he's going to speak to President Putin tomorrow, so we'll see how that conversation goes. This week, Nathaniel, the Conservatives are starting to build their manifesto for their policy ideas. And I think we've got a bit of an idea where they stand on things like, they want mobile phones banned in schools. We know what they think about the farmers. But are they happy with their leader? There's a story in The Telegraph that says there is a plot to oust her as leader of the Conservatives. What's going on?
Yes, so this is the Unite the Right plot. I think it's been reported both in the Telegraph and in the Sunday Times over the weekend. But I think, broadly speaking, it has come from people who are unhappy with Kemi Badenoch's leadership of the Conservative Party. They've suggested that there may be some kind of deal in the works with Reform. They point to a dinner between Dominic Cummings and Nigel Farage late last year and things like that. To be honest, don't think there's much. I don't think there's much going on here. In recent times, we've heard Kemi using the language that Reform isn't a serious party, and I think she's probably hit the nail on the head there. You look at a few things. So you look at their performance in by-elections, which is sort of a clear statistical measure we can use. Since the last election, they've not done anywhere near as well as the Conservative Party. Even Labour actually have underperformed in a number of local council by-elections. You look at the amount of money that the party have raised. Towards the tail end of last year, the Conservatives raised 1.9 million. Reform raised, I think, 1/7 of that, less than 300k. But the parties aren't really in the same place. Reform have 4 MPs, the Conservatives have 120. So although there is rumours of a pact of some kind, I think if both parties involved say they're not interested, then you might struggle to get something off.
You might. Do you think Kemi Badenoch is the right person to take the Conservatives forward to deal with this specific challenge?
Oh, absolutely. I think Kemi has a very forthright way of communicating. I think she communicates very directly. I think she communicates from the heart, and I think that's broadly speaking what people want from their politicians. I think her economically liberal stance is generally speaking right. I think most people are in favour of that kind of thing. I think what happened at the last election was that the Conservative Party looked somewhat tired. The Conservative Party didn't look like they had the sort of energy or the vision for the future, whereas Labour did.
Something fun to finish, Nathaniel. I enjoyed reading this on the way in this morning to work. And we've got the sports news in a moment or two. But there's a sport I didn't know anything about. It's called the Eton Fives. And our most dominant sportsman, someone who once didn't lose a match for 13 years, is over 40. Tom Dunbar. Introduce us to him.
Right, so Tom Dunbar, whose day job is running a finance company, has won 19 titles, I think, over the course of 24 years, but 19 titles in Eton Fives. And I must confess, actually, I had never heard of Eton Fives either. But yeah, Tom
It's a bit
Dunbar,
like squash, isn't it, without a racket? You play with a leather glove on your hand and you hit the ball with your hand rather than a racket.
yes, that's the one. But he yeah has been a reigning champion. I think he didn't lose for 13 years. But yeah, did has won 19 out of 24 championships. He tells us that he has stiff knees. And is now facing competition in the latest round from a much younger pair of contenders who are standing in the way of him making it to his 20th championship.
You'd
But
be
it's
fairly
incredible,
daunted
really.
if you were in your 20s and you were taking on this guy who's won 19 times in the last 24 years, won the championship every time.
Well, I'd probably be reassured if I heard on Times Radio that he had stiff knees, but I think yes, certainly the idea of someone who's won 19 times before versus me would probably put me in my place.
Yes, he says he lifts weights to keep up with younger players and practices without a ball to protect his shoulder. It's brilliant photographs in the Times as well. There's a video of them playing it as well. You can see it really is sort of like a squash court. It looks brilliant. Well, we wish Tom and his opponents the best of luck. Nathaniel, thank you so much. Political commentator with Young Voices UK.